fine. So a warm welcome to all of you for the first panel of this conference on fashion and sustainability. My name is Heike. I'm a cultural anthropologist and professor for fashion and styles, also contextual design at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to host this opening panel discussion and to bring together some of the most outstanding keynote speakers and pioneering experts in the field of fashion and sustainability. Kate Fletcher, professor at the Royal Danish Academy in Copenhagen. Khaya Mchunu, member of the University of Joahnnesbourg. Heike Derwanz, assistant professor at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. And Mathilda Tham, professor at Linnaeus University in Sweden. Myself, I would say sustainable fashion means more than simply clothes. Just the fact that the 2030 UN Agenda for Sustainable Development points out 17 sustainable development goals makes clear that sustainability is a huge systemic complexity, from the goals to promote peaceful and inclusive societies, to the aims to take urgent action to combat climate change, to the goal to conserve sustainability also in relation to oceans, seas, and the water, to protect, to restore, and to promote terrestrial ecosystems, up to the goal to achieve gender equality and to empower all women and girls. From my side, I can report from Vienna that last night here, the students occupied the University of Vienna, of Salzburg and Innsbruck under the agenda "The Earth Burns." For 1 week, there is a really huge climate occupation of Austrian universities going on right this moment. It started last night and it has been extended in the morning to other cities. So it is really something that is burning, that is more than clothes. And what all our 4 keynote speakers have in common is that they conceive fashion and with it design as a matter of systemic change. Working on, with and for sustainable fashion means to set up decolonizing, democratizing processes, global and local action, advancing the levels of social, economic, and environmental justice, finding paths towards circular economies, and decapitalizing forms of production and trade. New knowledges, skills, mindsets for fashion. Kate Fletcher and Mathilda Tham, 2 of our keynote speakers, claim in their jointly written Earth Logic Fashion Action Research Plan from 2090s. They urgently demand to grow out of growth and to proceed into an era of post-growth fashion, as also Kate Fletcher has coined the term in her book, The Craft of Use, Post-Growth Fashion, in 2016. In 2018, Kate Fletcher and Mathilda founded the Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion as pioneers in the field. They also edited already in 2015 the Handbook of Sustainability and Fashion. Khaya Mchunu became well known as a designer, artist, activist, and scholar for his decolonizing, socially engaged creative practices that transdisciplinarily foster critical social, economic, and racial justice through entrepreneurship and the empowerment of women, as he will tell us later. He also supports anti-racist, feminist, and democratic approaches through fashion and textiles by supporting shared social spaces for migrants and locals, as for example, in the Durban-based women-led project Suing for Africa. A distinguished critic of fast fashion, Heike Derwanz, recently published an anthology on minimalism, where she highlights the aesthetics and designs of minimal fashion, as well as the norms and values that are inscribed in sustainable fashion. Here she comes to the timely diagnosis that minimalism seemed to be the contemporary counter-image to the takeover of things, aiming at bringing control, order, and beauty into daily life. Well, as we are all already very curious on the work of our 4 keynote speakers, I would like to invite you, Kate, Khaya, Heike, and Mathilda, for sharing your presentations as a starting point for our discussion. The floor is yours, Kate. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. A very warm welcome from a very dark north of England this morning. So I'm just going to share a very short presentation. It's a thrill to be here and alongside so many esteemed colleagues. So first things first, I wanted to start by saying this is me. I think I'm aged about 3 or 4 in the city that I was born and raised. I grew up in Liverpool, in a working class family. Liverpool, for those who don't know it, is a port city in the north of England, famous, of course, for the Beatles, maybe the football, famous for a sense of humour, and probably for its poverty. When I grew up there, it was a place of extraordinarily few opportunities, no work, and very little hope. It was then, I think, that I learned that change is essential, that it can and must happen. And I think that's where things began for me. Since then, I've done countless projects in and around fashion and sustainability, and I've written many books. But I want to start by saying that I really recognise my privilege as I sit here in front of you. I identify as a white British woman who speaks and writes only in English, and this has many, many limitations. So my whiteness, my womanhood, my being able-bodied, my membership of a Western educational institution, these all confer huge privileges on me. I also recognise that the cultural structures that I work within favour individualism over interdependence, and that I've personally benefited from these. Perhaps it's for these reasons that I've been able to be one of the most troublesome people in the field of fashion and sustainability, the one who brought systems thinking to the field. And I have been able to have the time and the space and perhaps the trust to drive deeper and deeper change, to ask the questions that are tricky. So it's for these reasons that this has been possible. But as we start this conference, I just wanted to offer you this graph. It's a snapshot, of course, of CO2 emissions over the last, 800,000 years, a long old time. And I just wanted to take a moment to think about the imperative of change and to think about what has changed. So these carbon emissions, of course, we all know, are rising to never seen before levels. But of course, this isn't the only metric that portrays the threatened nature of our reality. In 2020, for instance, the total mass of all human-made materials, including those that we dress in, the things that we put on our bodies, they started to exceed all living biomass on Earth. Certainly, these are unprecedented times. Planetary processes, which need to be maintained within specific limits for ongoing life on Earth to be maintained, these are being transgressed with unpredictable and possibly catastrophic consequences at planetary scales, continental scales, individual community scales. We all know this already. But of course, when we turn our gaze to fashion, what we see is that the conventional approaches that we've been taking up to this point really haven't influenced the structural forces that are shaping the sector's impact in any fundamental way. They've not really touched the social, the political, the economic, the creative forces. So what we need to do instead, and I am starting talking about Earth Logic, and I know that Mathilda will pass the baton to Mathilda and she will carry on. We need instead, Mathilda and I propose, to work deeper with new logics, with new power shifts, with new imagination and a whole systems focus. And these new logics, like what we propose within Earth Logic, act as a lens, a way to reframe culture and mindsets in the sector. And these, of course, are the big stories we live by, and this is where we need to focus. So Earth Logic is a radical invitation to business leaders, to designers, to governance, to the media, to citizens, to all of us on this call and conference today, to put Earth first and to transform the fashion sector. What we're seeking here to do is to collaborate together in change. So Earth Logic is a system of approaches. It's a combination of a values explicit context, a checklist for how to keep the work on a radical track, and a series of different places or landscapes to work within. Our thinking is that if you have a different idea, a different logic that you're engaging fashion around, from that, different possibilities flow. I'm sure Mathilda will talk a little about this idea of a kaleidoscope, one of those children's toys that you put to your eye and twist. Every time you turn the kaleidoscope, you see new patterns and configurations, new possibilities and pathways. And Earth Logic is a twist of the kaleidoscope. It lets us put health and survival of Earth first, and that guides all activities. One of the things I'm just going to talk about in this very short presentation this morning is one of these Earth Logic landscapes, and this is local. It describes the possibility for fashion in ways that can contribute to the processes which make our communities vibrant and alive, which make them places which we want to call home. It's all about nurturing nature and culture improving actions. It's seeing the role of clothing and fashion processes as a really distinctive and healthy part of what it is to live. But this, of course, is disentangled from a growth imperative, an imperative to increase systematically year on year the volume of fashion, but instead it asks different questions, like, for instance, how fashion can be adapted to a place and distinctive of a region in the same way a wine is, for instance. Also, it asks how it can enable those who live in a place to have more control and influence over fashion decisions that go on to affect their lives. One of the things when we look at ideas around local and we think maybe a little about aesthetics is often these things maybe aren't pretty, maybe they aren't the ideal image of what you consider fashion to be. And this is, of course, because fashion's culture is a reflection of place. We need inevitably to start with what is available and the resource system where we are. Beginning where we are and building up is important. And I'm just going to close this short presentation by just talking a little about the sorts of practices that Earth Logic sees as a really critical part of this exciting and vibrant new space for fashion to exist within. These practices, of course, might include things like mending, but in this example, there's a free mending tools kit available in a local laundrette. Other things include things like producing a town map, which identifies clothing services in a place, which support the lives of people rather than only necessarily about what you can buy. So, as I hand over to the next speaker this morning, I wish that you could take forward with you this idea that what we need to do is begin to put the health of the earth at the center of all fashion activities. And this requires a radically new purpose for the fashion sector, perhaps one called Earth Logic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, for your great talk and the insights into your work. And we are going on with our kaleidoscope, and it's a really beautiful picture, and I think really also a very super picture for that, for fashion and sustainability umbrella. And I would like to hand over to Khaya, that you show us your presentation. The floor is yours, Khaya.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I don't know if you can see me. I'm going to share my screen and just jump straight to my presentation. Cool. So I'm going to share just, I suppose, speaking about fashion education and how community engagement is infused in fashion education. And I'm sharing that through Umthungu as a prism, which is I suppose like an orally passed saying. So in this presentation, I share an example of a collaborative design process to show an approach in which fashion contributes to social development. I use a community engagement between the University of Johannesburg's Department of Fashion Design with a community-based embroidery project called Mapula Embroidery Project. The example is shared through the prism of an aphorism in the Zulu language expressed as Umthungu. I align this aphorism to the themes of ethics in sustainability fashion. Umthungu translates literally to sewing gives life. It is not a documented saying or proverb like other Zulu sayings, but rather a familial aphorism shared with me by my mother, who often heard it from my grandmother. The expression was used by my grandmother to get my mother into sewing as a means of self-reliance and self-sustenance. Although my grandmother did not win into getting my mom into sewing, the saying was shared with me, an individual who did eventually get into the sewing practice. Umthungu is a noun that denotes the practice of sewing, where Philisa refers to that which gives life or to live life. Therefore, the phrase gives sewing the status of giving life, or at least that which plays a role to living. While it would be short-sighted of me to think of fashion solely as encompassing sewing, I find this aphorism to align closely with some of the themes of this year's Global Fashion Conference, such as the recognition that a linear fashion model sees human rights at stake, and the need for social responsibility guided by the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Therefore, I argue that if fashion embraces some aspects of the aphorism, fashion will play a role in social transformation and social responsibility, which then sees its contribution to the attainment of human rights. I now share an example of fashion education in which I see ideas of Umthungu bubbling. The Department of Fashion Design is one of 10 departments in the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture located in Johannesburg, South Africa. The department offers 2 undergraduate and 4 postgraduate programs. Because of my theme of Umthungu, I focus on a community engagement project that current second-year fashion students participated in. The purpose for presenting this project is to show how notions of Umthungu trickle into fashion education and the classroom context, and thus show the role of fashion education to the sub-themes of ethics and sustainability. Mapula Embroidery Project is an award-winning non-profit community project established in 1991. It assists over 150 women from the Winterveld and Hammanskraal to earn a sustainable income through embroidery as a response to the low employment rates in the area. So this is some of the work that the Mapula Embroidery Project is known for. These are called arts, like the art cloths, and they are basically used to make commentary on whatever events happen in South Africa or the world over. As you can see, there was a commentary on the murder of Colin Khoza, a commentary on rhino killings crisis in South Africa, and a comment on the transporting system in the country. In 2010, during the hard times of the COVID-19 pandemic, Mapula, amongst many arts, community arts and craft projects, faced difficulties. The problem was identified by the representative of the Mapula project and Professor Brenda Schmaman, a UJ colleague. The professor regularly commissioned Mapula to make bags for conference delegates, and the move of conferences from physical to virtual between 2020 and 2021 affected Mapula's income generation negatively. And obviously knowing that this is an income generation project, then that became quite a difficulty for the embroidery project. The situation necessitated the need for the development of new handbag designs for the embroidery group. The Department of Fashion Design was approached with the problem, and fashion students who you see on the screen designed these bags. So 3 tote bags designed by the 3 students were chosen by the Mapula representatives. So it was divided into different iterations. So I share the design partnership between the 3 students and 3 Mapula seamstresses, in which a training intervention was implemented, and this took place between May and June of this year. The 3 fashion students, a colleague and I, traveled to the Winterveld to train 3 Mapula seamstresses to make the bags. Each student partnered with 1 seamstress and were involved in the creation process of the bags. And then that's the meet and greet between ourselves and the seamstresses of Mapula, and further discussion and just explaining of the tote bags and the tweaks that were made to them during the process. And then, yeah, I've got more examples of the entire process where we were cutting the bags and so on and so forth. So while students arrived in the Winterveld with the purpose of sharing knowledge, the process also included students being taught different embroidery techniques by the seamstress partners. This is where the knowledge sharing and exchange became evident. And I think that's quite an important matter, because sometimes when we represent like the university community, we approach like a community thinking that we are going to give knowledge, but don't recognize how much knowledge we can actually draw from the community. By the end of the creation process, each pair used their experiences to name the tote bags. The name that would be used by the Mapula to market the tote bags. The names were as follows. Lay and Bird, the name combined the names of the student seamstress pair, Leia and Innocent, and responded to one of the embroidered panels that included, among others, a vibrant image of a bird. Mametu, a Zulu word that roughly translates to our mother. This name was chosen to reference the mostly all-female group and spoke to the notion of womanhood, which the pair associated with birth. The idea of birth was symbolically linked to the collaborative project between the Department of Fashion Design and Mapula, and how this collaboration holds the potential of birthing something that may lead to positive social change. Utlwano is a Sotho word meaning to understand one another. The pair felt that to achieve peace in the world, individuals need to understand one another and unite for a common cause in the attainment of world peace and harmony. I've got a close-up of some of the images with the embroidered panels. In conclusion, this project attempted to address the economic instability of a community project through the introduction of new design products. The process of addressing this problem showed how when fashion education is seen as community engagement, can be responsive to societal wicked problems. When fashion education does react to these wicked problems, it shows fashion's relevance in the 21st century and how elements of social responsibility, social responsiveness, and ethics become part of its makeup. Fashion herein has been shown to truly embrace the heart of the concept of Umtume Apilisa. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much for your great talk and insights in your work, in your community-based work. We will speak about it later. First, or thirdly, I would like to invite Heike Derwanz to give us insights in her work.
So thank you again for the invitation to take part of this discussion. I'm very happy to introduce a new perspective on sustainable use of clothing, which is an ethnographic one. So I'm working ethnographically. In the last years, I studied household behavior in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, household behavior with clothes. And in another 6-year ethnography, I also studied all urban institutions and infrastructures dealing with the post-consumer clothes, so to say. So making these kind of maps that Kate Fletcher already introduced, but in a bigger ethnography of 200 pages. So to study household and maybe sustainable behavior, I had to choose a group of people as an ethnographer who started in the middle of Western consumerism and then made their own personal way, in many cases, to a more conscious and also a more sustainable way of life. And this was through minimalism. So when I say minimalism and clothing, you may think of exactly this, what you can see here, this picture. Now I think have this in our cultural archive or cultural consciousness, that this is how today's minimalist aesthetics look like. So we have simple cuts, white, black, gray as colors, and a certain elegance, simplicity of style. But this is what I call Instagram minimalism. So maybe you think also of this digital nomads from the global north and their published lists of the 100 things or so that they own. This was in the early 2000s that people, mostly male digital nomads, published these lists of things that they own to show that they can live with less and that it is not much. But of course, Apple computers and smartphones, etc., was on top of the list. So we have one example here, Colin Wright, who claims that he has 51 things in the entire world. So I'm talking about different thing, and this is minimalism as a set of everyday practices of people who say that they are on their personal way to minimalism. Here we have a timeline of a certain way to see material possessions and the meaning of life. And Siddhartha, so Buddha, and Francis of Assisi, they have gone quite a similar ways. They lived in an affluent society, and they, at a certain point of their life, decided to step away from their possessions, material possessions, and live another life. And also they founded a new set of clothing that we still have today in this movement. And of course, then Henry David Thoreau made a famous experiment to live in the woods. And in the last century, we saw the starting problems with the earth, and the Club of Rome published this Limits to Growth, and this was a start to a new voluntary simplicity movement all over in the global north, in the affluent societies, which directly precedes today's minimalism. As an ethnographer, I wanted to find people who treat their clothes differently, but within today's consumer society. How do they do it, and how did they get there? And I asked the question, are these minimalists that I wanted to study maybe pioneering sustainable action? So I made an ethnographic research, as I just said, in minimalist or about minimalist wardrobes in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, where we visited up to 45 households in the years 2018, 2019. And as you can say here, minimalist wardrobes can look quite differently of what IKEA or other like films or I don't know, TV series shows us what is normal. Here you can quickly see 4 strategies that we found in these minimalist households, so that folding and hanging to have an overview over clothes is very important for them. As you can see, the folding is much inspired by, of course, Marie Kondo. We have found a lot of minimalists say, when my drawer is full, that is what I want to have. And when I want to buy or have new things, things have to go out. So the furniture size defined the mass of clothes for a lot of people. And minimalists also started to experiment with color concepts for the first time in their lives, and really found their new personal ways to cope with clothing and also fashions. And as you can see here, the last picture is one person who just owns one overall in white and wears yellow accessories with it. So this is a start for many people to develop what we call a capsule wardrobe. Capsule wardrobes exists for longer times. For example, in the 1980s, Donna Karan and other designers engaged with this concept of capsule wardrobes. And now minimalists and other people are very drawn to it, and some minimalists also form a uniform, to make it much more easy to decide on what to wear and get an overview. So our result in this project was that minimalism is not about sorting out. So this is what we see in the press or in the media a lot, that minimalism is about just throwing away all this stuff. But we found that minimalism, or everyday minimalism, is about learning to live with less through caring and repair. And this forms a different and more intense relationship to clothes. That means that all these people from the middle of the mass society learned caring and repairing techniques only when they started their minimalist everyday practices with clothing. So ultimately, everyday practices change, and people finally also find new forms of getting things when needed. And maybe you know this rule in minimalism: think at least 3 days and nights before you buy something. And I think in these new forms of getting things, I don't say buying, right? But getting things. This is different. And I think here lies also the biggest difference to the Instagram minimalism, where you maybe see influencers buying whole new wardrobes when there's a new season and advertise this. So here on my last slide, you can see a household, a minimalist household, who even uses up their textiles within the household. Also, this person started from mass consumerism, and through minimalism and a lot of experimenting and finding new and often more sustainable ways to use clothes, it ends up in this washing up clothing rest of something that you can see here, but you can also see the typical color palette of minimalist clothing so that everything fits together. You can see that washing, detergents, and everything is made through basic materials. And you can also see that order and folding is very important to keep this ritualized everyday practices with clothes running on a really very sustainable scale. So that was a short insight into this ethnography, and yeah, I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Heike. And I will quickly hand over to Mathilda so that we also get to know your work, and then we make kind of circle also back to Kate's work.
So I'm going to talk about earth logic, ethics, and aesthetics. And I want to say thank you for having us here. Thank you all species supporting us, the literal soil, and also thank you all the intellectual soil that we are building on here today. And thanks for bringing all this attention so beautifully together. Is great. So I think we're all here because we want to do something. We want to find agency. And my agency grew from an old sewing machine, making Snoopy clothes and other clothes, to growing increasingly frustrated with the fashion system's tolls on people and the environment, and also then realizing that I had to kind of move from the product level of fashion to working with systems and eventually paradigms with Kate. It's been brilliant. And my work sits in the field that we call meta design, which is designing for change and uncompromising approaches to change. I also draw on my own work, and I have the beautiful path with my daughters and other young people that help me to remember that play is an essential part of working with very serious stuff, and that there are futures hopefully far away from the end of my lifetime. So in the summer of 2021, a great report came up that didn't talk about what's wrong, but that talked about why we haven't gone further than we have in the last few decades of climate action and stuff. And basically 4 points were raised. One problem is the concentration of power and reliance on the economic growth logic. Another one is what Einstein would have talked about, the problem of trying to fix problems from within the paradigms that created the problems. A third is an over-reliance on technology and a lack of attention to social norms. And a fourth is separating, for example, climate change from social justice and the individual's experience from the global systems. And we could say that this is actually a brief for Earth Logic, which meant we were psychic because we wrote it before this came out. And so we proposed Earth Logic as a radical plan because we need really advanced starting points now. We can't start from scratch, and we don't have time to duplicate research. So we've kind of wanted to draw a line acknowledging the elephant in the room, which is the logic of economic growth. Basically, in growth logic, we make more and more and more. That makes sense. And that means that systems and product level gains can never achieve a net gain. And so we proposed the kaleidoscope twist and a different logic, which is the logic of the survival and health of all species and Earth and also humans. And this leads to very different patterns and flows. And as Kate mentioned, that's a system of approaches, including values, landscapes, and what not to do, including thinking that it's somebody else's responsibility and technology can fix it. And one of the landscapes that I think is particularly relevant for the question today, ethics and aesthetics, is that of languaging. And what languaging means is basically building on Maturana and Varela, that language can open and close both thought and action spaces. And we want to imagine a life where we purposefully use Earth logic word stories and images. And I thought it was great with Khaya's use of language before, and also the use of minimalism away from Instagram. And I think that exemplifies Earth logic language. And I just want to give you a couple of examples. So imagine if we stop using the word consumer, which comes etymologically from the words destroy and destruction, and instead use something that's much more practice-oriented, like gardening. And imagine if we stop thinking about fashion as a product, and instead of practices that we do together and building relationships. So that's kind of the power, we think, of languaging. I also want to bring our attention to the notion of care, which is a kind of intimate healing practice of governance, so regulation, distribution, organizing from within. And what Kate and I have realized is that it's like so powerful because it takes sustainability from an expert pursuit and situates it in the remit of everybody's life. So it's something everyone can do. And in fact, everyone does do care, whether it's about our kids, pets, our clothes. We're able to care, we're able to know when it's enough and when it's too little as well. And care is basically about being in touch with the world. And I want to bring our attention to the opposite of aesthetics, which is anesthetics, which is a procedure in medics, as you know. And it's the inability to feel and care. And we can't care unless we have touch. So bringing change into the remits of everybody's life is essential for aesthetics and ethics for the future. Finally, it's not pretty, as in we're bringing up a can of worms, we're bringing up trouble, we're bringing up cruxes, and that's what we got to do. And that causes a lot of difficult feelings. It's not easy to deal with less. It's not easy to deal with any kind of change, loss of lifestyles, loss of economic growth for a company. But it's the trouble we need to stick to. And whereas in the past, Kate and I have been accused of coming with ideas that are illogical, I think us and many other people are also feeling now that people understand that it's not logical to destroy our planet. There is no business to do, or any kind of stuff to do on a dead planet. And with that, I would like to say thank you with 10 seconds to go. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming back to the image of the kaleidoscope where we are meandering now, and we have had really interesting insights in this prism of sustainability. And I would, as the first part of our discussion, I would like to ask each of the speakers a question. And I would like to start also to open up this umbrella again and address my question to Kate. When I saw, when I saw this curve, this chart you presented us, it also reminded me, as you also work in your project on decentering durability, on the intersections of decolonizing and decarbonizing agendas. And I had a kind of a flashback to design history or alter design histories when maybe you know the essay of Rolando Vázquez on decolonizing design, and he quotes the Orbis spike at the point of decolonization, where at the point of colonization, in 1610, there was really a massive explosion also of the carbon in the world. So to go back, and I was also interested in your work that you say that you see futures at the intersections of decolonizing and decarbonizing agendas. Maybe you could a little bit elaborate on that.
Thank you, Elke. Thanks also to the other speakers. That was just such a fascinating beginning to the day. that chart of carbon emissions is redolent of many other maybe similar charts. In fact, when I was putting the presentation together, I was thinking, oh, you know, this in many ways is similar to the growth of consumption of clothing over recent times, that similar sort of exponential rise. And I imagine also it maps onto other things like you're describing this sort of peak, if you were to look at it in a sort of truncated way, this peak that happened with the process and mechanism of colonization. And to your point specifically about the power and the intersection of recognizing the imperative of decolonial shifts alongside decarbonizing shifts. I mean, I think this is the point really, is that up till now, many people have been pursuing things in isolation and failing to recognize that that is not going to drive the sorts of systemic change we need, that everything, of course, is interconnected. And the point of the project you mentioned, the Decentering Durability project, was to try to bring that critique into a domain that maybe everybody sort of thinks is the right answer. Durability is a brilliant thing, etc. But it was actually to look at it and to understand the systems of ideas, excuse me, the systems of ideas, durability in Euro and American contexts is wedded to, and it's very much wedded to questions around capitalism, to questions around enclosure of land, about extractivism, about trade and colonial access to resources. And actually beginning to lift the lid on these questions is a liberating force, because then we begin to see the potential for opening up a vast array of very, very wildly different approaches to engaging with sustainability that goes far beyond the sort of Western view of what needs to happen. And I would just bring this sort of full circle to say that within Earth Logic, one of the primary landscapes, we have 6 areas where we really feel like the work must and can happen at speed, is around pluralizing what we're doing. So beginning to really recognize is the edge of the approaches that we've taken to date, and also open up space for a diverse, inclusive responses, which don't only come from Western capitalistic centers. So that's the point there, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kate. And it's really also a good point to hand over to Khaya. And thank you also again for your both work, and Khaya, also you for your impressive work on decolonizing agendas and and empowering systems and economic thought, fostering women, feminism. And in our pre-conversation, we talked also about the South African white papers of education. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the role of fashion, of art and design, what they play in this process of decolonization in a broader sense. Yes, would be really interesting for us.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think I'd just like to echo the words that I was so inspired, and I really enjoyed all the presentations. But in response to your question, and the white paper in the South African context is, I suppose, just as a little background, when we transitioned from apartheid to like a democratic landscape in South Africa, a white paper was developed by the Ministry of Higher Education. And in the white paper, I guess the question that was asked was, what role can higher education play in addressing issues of redress and really working with some of the ills of the past? And one of the things that was identified as holding the potential of, I guess, playing a role, like in that regard, would be ideas of community engagement and how the university uses their resources to, I guess, respond to some of the ills that are happening in the community context. Not every discipline plays a role, or at least not that I know. And I mean, no one is going to hold you accountable for not infusing community engagement as part of your teaching and learning. But I guess it also, it's an individual choice too, that I can't be like a lecturer that exists in a vacuum. Like the whole idea of a university is that it's part of a community, it's located in a community, and we can't, I guess, exist as an ivory tower and overlook some of the problems that we face as we drive into our campuses. And I suppose, it's just a matter of responding to the white paper and the role of community engagement in addressing some of the ills. In this case would be poverty and the lack of financial support and lack of community development. And I suppose it's just changing the lens that beyond seeing fashion through like the perspective of like trend and transporting, it's about really having a critical reflection and having those difficult questions that how can I use fashion to actually address some of the issues that are around me. And I hope I've responded to the question that you've asked.
Yeah, thank you. I find it really so important what you told us, that in the course of all of the decolonization and the democratization, there is the question: who owns education? Who owns education, and who has to be supported through education? And this is I think a really radical. It is simple but very radical in the ways of doing and serving for education. Okay, so I would come to Heike. You also very impressively showed us that all this minimalism goes also along with imperial gestures, when you showed us this Colin Wright standing in front of this kind of museum or something building, academic building. And coming back to your ethnographic research on minimalism, I would like to ask you also something on the relation between ethics and aesthetics. Do you think minimalism is or goes along with buying eco-friendly clothes? How are minimalism and eco-friendly clothes, how are they related?
Yeah, thank you for this question, because in our group discussions that we did, minimalists were very disappointed about buying eco-friendly clothes because they thought that they last longer. So you can understand that when you have 40 or 50 clothes only and you wash them once a week, you just have one trouser or something. There is heavy wear and tear on the clothes, and they wanted to change also to this eco-friendly clothes, but they often did not held up this image of being longer lasting in the everyday. And this was especially interesting for us, that this story or narrative, of course, goes with eco-friendly clothing. But as we know from all the literature, of course, buying is not the only thing to make your clothes eco-friendly or more eco-friendly. So it was interesting for us that here we have to go beyond the first answer that we have usually for a more sustainable lifestyle, by eco-friendly and fair. So I think this was one important thing, and it is more about appropriating the clothes, or I think also what Kate wrote in other articles about this usage, right? It was also interesting that for a lot of our minimalists, saving and thrift played a role as well, but they incorporated eco-friendly clothes, which are in the public eye often too expensive to buy. But for minimalists, it's not this simple count, but the count is how long will it last? Will it do its job for a longer time?
Okay, thank you very much, Heike. And my next question goes to Mathilda. And I was really curious, and I would like to ask you or address you as a designer. You are an academic, but also a designer. And what I found very interesting, that you developed or defined your approach as meta design. And here, I think maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this, what it means if you start a design or start fashion design. How would you describe the difference between that, what we know as common fashion design, and what you would do as a meta designer?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think, as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, it's about our ability to move and to change things and to have agency, which is the experience of being able to do something. And I found that my agency was not at the level of the product, since the product is part of a system and in turn part of a paradigm, a culture, a logic. So I found that through perfecting products in different ways, or even actually taking my attention to discrete systems like business models, I found that that is not where my agency is, because of the bigger logic, which predominantly is the logic of economic growth, which is then also tied in with racism, sexism, Western hegemony, extractivism, human exceptionalism. And from fashion, the point of fashion at the level of product, as a designer, I would be like, I can't say there's no way I can do anything about that. So I have been working to understand systems and also futures perspectives and larger political tendencies to have a voice from within where I am, where I stand, which includes the fashion sector. And meta design allows us to take an uncompromisingly systemic approach and turn our attention when it comes to design outcomes to where we think interventions can be meaningful. That includes the level of the product. But for me, I think the most powerful things I've done is to work at the level of languaging. So that is through the words, the stories I tell, or I predominantly tell together with other people through co-creation. That's where I feel that I, as a designer and as a meta designer, can have agency. And I think what's important about this is that we can open up this space for some people. Working at the level of the product is exactly where they have the most agency. That was not the case for me. So it's up for grabs, and we have the license as designers to choose our rooms for designing and to choose how we define design, and that will radically transform what we're able to do as well.
So thank you very much. I think we come back to this, that designing sustainable fashion goes along with a huge shift also in design thinking and in the making itself, in a redefinition, especially in the fashion case, I think. But before we discuss this in our final question, I would like to invite you as speakers to get in conversation with each other. Would like to start with the first question. Just Khaya, okay, go ahead.
I'll start. When I listened to Mathilda's presentation, I think one of the things that you said was that when people react to the work that you do with Kate, is that what you're suggesting are illogical methods, and perhaps Kate could respond to this as well. I think when you said that, like, a part of me felt like maybe it's the fear or the uncomfort of addressing change and the whole idea of like transformation of what's probably been considered to work for centuries. I don't know. I guess it's a question, but also like a comment, and I'm hoping to attract like your response to that idea about people jumping to the conclusion that whatever you're doing is illogical, whatever you're suggesting is illogical. Do you think it has a lot to do with the fear and the uncomfort of addressing these things which people have been doing for years? Sorry for being long-winded.
No, but absolutely, yes. The answer is yes. And I think what we have to also, from a like more positive view, we have to consider that no change, no friction. So unless there is friction, there's probably not much change going on. If you're doing your work and nobody gets angry, you probably haven't achieved much. So I and we embrace the friction, and we also have to be very humble and careful and loving when we consider what we as humans experience in change, because it is really challenging, and we lash out and say it's illogical, it can't be true, it makes me angry, you're wrong, you know. That is we are really young in this process, all of us, you know. We're probably not even teenagers, and we have to honor that and take care of that. And there are very wise people, including the Buddhist leader Thich Nhat Hanh, who said that the way out is in. We have to examine our own position as individuals and communities is this, and how we are capable to handle change and nurture ourselves and each other, so that we can work with the friction. And I also, speaking to you, Khaya, I think that's what you imply is also that can be part of education, and I see that in your different ways of languaging, that there is a lot of kind of compassion in there as well, and I think that it has a place in education as well, this care.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Okay, Heike.
I would take up this thread. As I, for myself, work in teachers' education for craft and design teachers in school, I would like to ask Khaya about the role of the skills to sew. I loved that you showed us that sewing is self-reliance and self-sustenance, right? And I wanted to ask, how can we foster this, and how can, in your project, in your work, you advertise sewing beyond higher education? Because I think now in Austria, for example, there's less and less people who can just hold a needle and a thread and put on a buttonhole again, put on a button again. So what is sewing in your projects, and how do you promote it?
Sure. A really difficult question, but I think in terms of the intervention projects that I've been a part of, my point of, I suppose, how I started off would be to really approach like a project that is already there. And I think one of the things, I mean, when we approach certain things, we also need to consider like the context in which they're operating. And certainly from at least some of the projects that I've been working with, one of the reasons why people get into the sewing practice is as an income generation practice. Mm-hmm. And you'd find instances where people weren't even interested in it. It's not something that they enjoyed doing, even as young women, but because of being unemployed, and then what else can I do? I need to work with my hands, and working with my hands means learning how to sew. But I think it also depends. I mean, when I was explaining that aphorism, Mchunu uyaphilisa, it was really my grandmother trying to tell my mom, learn this as a way of self-sustenance. But my mom was not interested at all. Like, she wasn't interested in sewing. She didn't do it. And it just so happened, like a generation later, I became that individual that was interested in it. Yeah, it's such a difficult question. I suppose, I mean, I know you probably, like what I picked up from the presentation is that Instagram can possibly play a role because we've got a lot of Instagrammers, and then perhaps you could use that as a platform to show how important sewing is and that it's a skill that we really can't lose. And yeah, thank goodness for the YouTubers as well, because certainly I follow that, and it plays a role, I guess, in wanting to know the skill more and more. Yeah, I hope I responded to your question.
So I think it's, yeah, Kate, it's your turn.
So thank you. May I just continue unraveling that a little more? And I was thinking about skills and practices, which I think we've all been talking about actually, and maybe what we're realizing increasingly, that this shift away necessarily from accumulation of goods, but towards care and maintenance is the essential work that defines where we are at this time. And then I was thinking maybe this is a question both for Khaya and also for Heike in your different contexts, but it's thinking about how can we, within various university settings maybe and broader, how can we find a way to set briefs and also begin to set assessment criteria for students that make this shift towards community-based work, transformation of relationships and skills. So these are sometimes where we get blocked because we end up getting caught by assessment criteria and then revert to the old ways of doing things. So what are the ways we can make sure that we really capture this moment and drill this or open this up for students in a different way?
So Khaya stays silent and thinks, and I take the opportunity to answer this. So at my university, the Academy of Fine Arts, the craft and design education department is together with the art education. And I think there's lots of, in the last 10, 20 years maybe, there's lots of practices coming from art, underlining the social dimension, and this, working local, working with other groups, connecting schools to their localities, which gets more and more important. And that means for us, opening up our houses and our White Tower of the university also to start in higher education to make clear that we need to talk to a broader group of society, and start with I usually start to walk with the students in the city, include walks and include a lot of institutions. So my students usually go to charities and have to sort the clothes that come there as donations. So that means, for example, sorting sacks, blue sacks, plastic sacks of fast fashion waste materials. And then they have to decide, can we give that on, or is that waste? What can we do with it? And get a feeling what is really out there. And for me, important is that they, from the first day at university, learn that they are not closed in a ebony tower here. But I always, also with my background as an ethnographer, I confront them with the everyday. So I'm also against talking about that our clothes come from sheeps and this is all wool, when in front of you sits a generation that has only polyester clothes or fiber mixes on their body, and there's no wool anywhere, you know. So our methods and our content really has to change from the classical textiles education that we had in the 20th century. And I think the best way for me is to use ethnography to see what's really out there.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to think, Heike. I think what I what I immediately thought of was that in the university space, we've got research centers and research institutes that are probably addressing those societal problems. And I think certainly, at least in my experience, when we do try and address those societal problems, the whole idea of interdisciplinarity and collaboration comes into play. And I certainly think because those centers, in a way, can function as the bridge between myself as the lecturer who comes from my own department and the community out there because of the work that they're already doing. And perhaps one way of doing it is to hold those conversations with those research centers and identify which community they are working with and how they are working with the community, and then find a way of, adapting whatever they are doing into a brief for students. And so I think it's a matter of using those, or seeing like the value of those research centers and working around the idea of interdisciplinarity and collaboration, which is quite a key thing, I think, for many universities, but certainly for the University of Johannesburg.
There is a question already from the audience saying that we might run out of time in regard of the public discussion. So I would say maybe we come back to the question and that Petra Leutner asked, because in a way it also is the question I would have asked as the last question of our to close our panel. And the question is how to find a new role of the designer in the fashion system regarding fashion and sustainability. We've heard about meta design, about systemic thinking, about participatory design, social design. So many new layers also of design come into play. And Heike also said, okay, we have to rethink the education system of the 20th century. It's really urgent. And I would just, invite you to elaborate on this, and also to invite people from the audience to put their questions in the chat so that the panel has the opportunity to answer. Maybe Mathilda, because I cut your question, maybe, and we were discussing about the role of the designer, maybe you would like to start on this question again.
Sure, thank you so much, Heike. The important thing is that we start where we have touch. And if we want to work with fashion, find somewhere to do change. I think that's more important than defining meta design or speculative design or social design or even ethnography. I think about where you have touch and start there. And I think one thing that's really important from meta design, and also the gardening work that Kate and I are developing, is that we cannot seed, just throw ideas out there or propose stuff without also nurturing what we do. So think of what you do as change work as something very humble that will grow with the nurturing of many different people and many different species. You're not going to start straight away by standing on the barricades and making a new policy happen, or if even that is the most effective way. But think about where you can start and how what you're doing can be nurtured. And there are opportunities for change work everywhere. And also think about how you can care for yourself in change work, which will involve friction, and how you can support other people who are doing change work. So this is also like civil courage. When somebody is saying, hey, we're talking about diversity and we're all white, stand up and say, hey, like, how can we make this more inclusive? So there is a role for designers in so many ways, including just standing up for change and for different interests in any kind of situation. I shut myself up there, so I give space for more people.
So are there other ideas from the panel to this question? Yeah, Heike?
I have a very basic wish to designers and also to design education. Please include repairability into the design of clothes, and please make special courses, or better, include it in everything, the matter of repairability and the matter also of the materials and their real everyday functionality. So of course, when I wash the elastic band in, I don't know, pajama trousers, it will wear off, it will and we have to change this, but we don't have to throw away the whole trousers. So this is one very basic step and wish from me.
Yeah, Kate?
Sorry, the mute button and
Yeah.
I are dancing a little here. And I think I would add to this that certainly we can definitely change the system. There's huge heart to be taken from that as a thought. One of the most powerful things, I think, is you can equip yourself with understanding of where are the places that are likely to bring big change. You can understand that, and you can also understand that most people generally start not in the places where they're bringing big change, not because it's difficult, but because you sort of get drawn instead to materials interventions. And and this is a bit of a digress, but one of the books that I wrote, the first book, the first chapter is about materials, and there's 8 other chapters or 7 other chapters. And when I used to ask people about which chapters they read in that book, they were, just the first one. The first one is what we need because everything's about materials. But I would counter that by saying what systems thinking shows us is that it's very important to work with materials, but it's not the place which is going to drive big change, because that's nested within a system itself whose purpose is not health of the earth, but whose purpose is generally a purpose of economic growth. And so you're always, if you're working with materials, you're always going to be fundamentally limited by this bigger system goal. It will always shape everything that you're doing. So absolutely work with materials, but understand that if you can work with them within a changed system purpose, then that's when all power is unleashed. And it's a little bit like recognizing that we just need to get that first goal, that system purpose set to a different goal, and then we will be in a space of huge amount of creative outpouring and potential where we're rooted in the earth and we're using that to go forward.
Super. Thank you very much for this plea. I would also, Mathilda, 1 second. I also would like to invite again the audience to put questions into the chat. And I think Mathilda, go ahead.
No. I was just saying.
No. At present we have no further questions, but please, I would like to encourage and to invite the audience. But please, Mathilda.
No, I was just saying. Yeah, I agree. I wasn't.
You said you agree. Yeah. Yes. Are there any questions from the audience? If there is no question from the audience, we could also, Mathilda, are you also thought of a question to one of our participants or from the discussion from our panels, keynote speakers? Maybe we could close with that then, I would suggest.
Yes, my question was about the tension between diversity and plurality, which we need, and the simultaneous need to move together. And I think what we are really struggling with is that we are lots of people trying to work for change in very different ways, but we're not organized necessarily in the conventional way, and we don't have the same muscles and support as people working from the economic growth logic. So one of our continuous preoccupations is how we can create an Earth logic corridor where we can connect the work of Heike and Khaya and all other people trying to promote change from where they are without streamlining that narrative and making it really diverse but still connected, so that we together can have power and visibility. So if you have ideas, we really need them, basically.
Oh, it sounds like, in a way, also like a closing remark or a call for ideas. And I would like also to end this panel with a plea of Mathilda for participation, connection, conviviality, post and decolonial futures. And I would hand over to the organizers, Petra and Ulrike, for some closing remarks or whatever you like.
Yes, dear Elke and dear participants, thank you so much for this very, very interesting conversation and for your presentations. And I guess we had those 2 parts: theoretical, a vision from Kate and from Mathilda, and very practical inspiration from Heike and from Khaya. And this was really great that we have these both parts in this discussion. And I really thank you so much. I guess it was a very, very interesting beginning for this conference. And Ulrike, do you want to say something, please? So thank you, and we see us.
Yes, also from me, some very, very warm thank you to all of you, because I was really impressed about the aspect of the manual skills as maybe on the one hand, a very old thing and a very common, a very traditional thing, but on the other hand, a brand new thing. And this was for me really inspiring, because I think the combination and the adaptation from the human hand to the earth logic as a combination to support sustainability is really a heartfelt aspect, which is brand new for me. I was really inspired about that. So I thank you very much for bringing this aspect into the conference. In many more, of course, but I was really touched by this point. And thank you, Kate, and thank you, Elke, especially for you to be the chair. And thank you, Heike and Khaya, for all those community spirits and for so many ideas. And I was really, really amazed about your thoughts and having you all here. Thank you very much.